Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
This season has been magic. Just to sum it up in one word, simply the best. Many insist that he may be the best player ever.
You're a perennial all-star.
Ever received this honor in our franchise's NBA history.
You've had an MVP year.
Great statistics, but your teammates had a great year because of you.
The one fans endlessly debate on social media.
And if you were looking for what an MVP season is, your season this year is a role model for an MVP season.
Led the scoring in the NBA for the fifth consecutive time.
For the second consecutive year.
A man who joins legendary greats from the history of the game like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bill Russell, Michael Jordan, and Wilt Chamberlain as the only players in NBA history to have won the MVP at least 4 times.
My pleasure to present
The 2000 Kia NBA
Valuable Player Award.
The fans here and around America join me in congratulations
Larry Bird. Magic Johnson.
Michael Jordan.
to Charles Barkley,
Tim Duncan.
Kevin Garnett.
Steve Nash,
Dirk Nowitzki.
LeBron James.
Kevin Durant.
Russell Westbrook. James Harden. Giannis Antetokounmpo.
According to Bontemps with MVP voters, this looks to close off as one of the closest MVP finishes in NBA history, as Embiid narrowly leads by 2 total points over Jokic. The thing to consider is this latest straw poll started to be calculated before Embiid sat out of the marquee game against Jokic in Denver.
The past several years, we've had a lot of times when people like to try to argue this isn't over at this point, right? Oh, somebody could win. Like last year, people were trying to tell me, oh, you know, Joel could win, Giannis could win, there's some other option. And I kept telling people, Jokic has too big a lead. It wasn't a huge lead. It was like 100, 150 points. I think it was basically the difference between Embiid and Giannis in this poll. But that was too big just between 2 people for it to really change. Jokic was going to win. But when you get to between now and April 9th at the end of the regular season, I don't see a scenario where we're going to look at this and know how this is going to go. I think we're going to find out when the NBA has a press conference somewhere, whether it's in Denver or Philly or less likely but plausible in Milwaukee, to announce they're giving the MVP trophy, I think called the Michael Jordan trophy for the first time, to one of these 3 guys. And that's not something that's happened since Shaq and Steve Nash back in 2005, which was separated by 34 points. This is truly going to be a photo finish down to the end.
Let's break down the complete objective criteria to win MVP. Number 1, MVP stats, usually top 5 in points per game, rebounds per game, assists per game, etc., with great efficiency. 2, advanced metric leaders. This includes PER and BPM. The leader of PER for that season is usually the MVP, as it encapsulates the major statistical categories while prioritizing efficiency, which the MVP award usually values. When looking at the all-time BPM by a player for a season, what's most interesting is most of these were the players' MVP seasons. Number 3, top seed in conference and or overall NBA team standings. The lowest seed ever to win is 6th seed Russell Westbrook from OKC over 3rd seed Harden. Jokic in the 2021-2022 season 2. They're usually near the top seed in overall record and similar wins to top seeds. 4, leading the NBA MVP ladder over the course of the year and having MVP credentials. Being known or considered as MVP off namesake is a factor. Curry was having a bad shooting slump and shooting season in 2022, but still considered top 5 and the MVP candidate off namesake. Same with Steph in 2019 after not making the actual playoff, because he's a 2-time MVP winner and always in consideration. The same logic goes for all-star selection. The first one is always the hardest. It gets easier to be picked after and especially later as legacy picks. Nobody just sneaks in out of nowhere and suddenly wins the MVP. It's months and weeks of building your MVP case consistently. Your name is constantly in the MVP conversation and news cycle. You were being considered and talked about for the award far before April and for most of the year. 5, number of games played compared to other MVP candidates. More games played, the better and more impressive season. Having MVP stats with more games played is more impressive. 6, how important the player is to the team's winning. How valuable is the player? Without Ja Morant, the Grizzlies were still 9-2 in 2022, and so he's not as pivotal to their wins, or at least narrative-wise. Makes the Ja MVP case less compelling because he's not the main sole contributor towards their winning, as they win without him too. Number 7, although the scoring title or assist champion is usually not the MVP, ideally it does coincide with other hardware and awards, making the MVP case more compelling. One of Magic Johnson's MVPs came with the assist champion title, but he was second in assists per game in his other 2 MVPs. Nash was assist champion in both his MVP seasons. KD, Curry, second MVP, Westbrook, Harden all won the scoring title the season they were the MVP. 8. New MVP candidates are more likely to win. This avoids voter fatigue. LeBron and MJ dealt with this a lot. KD and Rose both won over LeBron, and Karl Malone won over Jordan. 9. Record-breaking performances and milestone years. Westbrook averaged a triple-double in 2016. Harden has point streaks and a span of 60-point triple-doubles. Despite Steph's Warriors being a 9 seed in the West in 2021, becoming the all-time three-point leader was a compelling case to garner him as an MVP finalist.
The one time that the poll is flipped from the last one to the end was when Russell Westbrook won in 2017. First time I did a poll. But as McMahon knows, he was at the game. Yes. You had Russell not only be the first guy to ever have a triple-double that he clinched between then and the end of the season. He had that incredible game in Denver where he hit the game winner, and everybody in Denver cheered for him. It's one of the most memorable.
That was when he broke the record for triple-doubles in a season. He scored the last 13 points to lead this huge comeback. He hit a 35-foot buzzer beater to give him a 50-point game. I mean, it was like about as strong a fit. And then the next game, the last game of the road trip, he sat out, which was the first time all season that he sat out.
Right. And you knew
the finishing kick was ridiculous for Russ.
Yeah, you knew after that Denver game that Russell Westbrook was going to be the MVP of the league. Like, there wasn't really any debate about that.
10. Memorable games, buzzer beaters, winning 1v1 matchups against top teams and other MVP candidates. Beating other MVP candidates in marquee games means you're the best player in the world now. The Jokic versus Embiid game was huge, and record against each other was important in the 2022 MVP race. Westbrook had an assist of the year pass and 2 memorable buzzer beaters in his MVP season. Harden's crossover on Wesley on his MVP year was also an iconic and memorable statement. MVP-like games where you carry the team, score 40 or 50, make a statement-type game to the league. Giannis had a perfect field goal percentage game in 2023, which would help his MVP case this year. 11. Retrospective redemption. When an MVP was snubbed enough times and the player hasn't won one yet for years, the voters feel obligated to finally give the player MVP, even if it's not the season they deserve it for. Brian Windhorst even said it's his turn.
There's really not a difference between them. So it's going to be a pretty agonizing decision.
Well, the difference is 2 of them have won 2.
Yes, I was going to say.
One of them's won 0. That's one factor.
It is kind of Embiid's turn. It is. Like, if it's close.
I hate to put it that way. But
it's not like you're saying, hey, you got to distribute these things evenly. But, like, if you're like, man, I don't know which one of these guys to pick, then I would say the tie goes to the dude who has been in the mix for the last few years and hasn't yet won one.
This kind of MVP is more of a hindsight bias MVP, to give the MVP now when they should have probably gotten the MVP for a prior season. When the hindsight case becomes so strong, like with Embiid this year, it usually overtakes all the other objective metrics and cases. Joel Embiid this year, when he really should have won last year. Nuggets were a 6th seed in the West and 10th overall. Embiid was 4th seed in the East and Philly was 8th overall. Narrative-wise, Jokic obviously carrying his team massively, as his off-on numbers were drastic, and Murray missed the whole season and Michael Porter Jr. missed almost the entire season. Advanced metrics aren't something that's entirely brand new, and we're being introduced into the NBA over many years now, and were already fairly prominent in previous years and used by GMs, coaches, and teams to figure out their best players and lineup. Last year was unique in that it was the primary argument for MVP, as Jokic led in almost every advanced metric, and his traditional stats were already clearly MVP worthy. But despite the worst team record, Jokic was given MVP off these advanced metrics for the first time, which was fairly inconsistent with the way the award has historically always been given, considering these metrics never existed before, and so voters never considered or looked for this when voting the way it was done last year. These were weighted so highly last year, Jokic won. In hindsight now, due to the lack of consistency, there is a push by many voters that it's now Embiid's turn. When Harden lost many MVPs and had a lot of MVP award shares over the years, from the first time he was snubbed for Curry's first MVP and then later to 6th seed OKC's Westbrook, and so Harden had now lost under 2 very different criteria. And then in 2018, even though many would consider peak LeBron, voters felt with Harden now winning more than they all did that season with 65 wins and having a strong MVP case, there's no criteria he didn't cross, as they were easily number 1 seed in the whole NBA. And despite LeBron's individual heroic and losing Kyrie to Boston for Isaiah Thomas, who was clearly not the same player and injured, it was now Harden's turn. Despite LeBron being the most valuable player in the league, especially to the Cavs, who had to rebuild right after he left, it was only right to finally credit Harden for MVP after all the previous snubs. Many voters felt it wasn't right for Harden to eventually retire with no MVPs. 12. International players get favored. Giannis 2 times, Nash 2 times, Jokic 2 times. The NBA has always wanted to be global and international, so it only makes sense that to push the game forward, they would favor international players to win MVP and represent the league. 13. Are fairly subjective and depends on what you value, but ultimately I made this blueprint to roughly get an idea of where a player ranks among their peers based on how elite a player is on offense, defense, or both, as well as impact to winning championships and even the MVP itself. Tier 1 players are more likely to win. It's harder for lower tier players like Tier 3 Chris Paul or Tier 3 DeRozan, etc. to win MVP despite being number 1 seed because they're not Tier 1. Tier 2 players can win and become Tier 1 like Jokic. Players like DeRozan and Ja in 2022, while deserving of MVP, is hard to end up winning because the climb was sudden and unexpected as they were not even Tier 2 level before being considered now. Giannis and Jokic are still favorites because they've been there and have been seen as Tier 1 or Tier 2 players for the last few years since the NBA was really making Rose the face of the league, but once his injuries piled up and derailed his career, they're less likely now out of regret for pushing a player so young, so fast to MVP. Looking back, it also becomes more clear LeBron should have won that MVP. Rose got his first All-Star appearance just a season before and became MVP the very next season. This is like if Ja wins MVP this season, which is really unlikely. Rose was around Tier 4, All-Star caliber player the previous season and immediately jumped into Tier 1 MVP. Usually players like Jokic, Embiid, Giannis, Tatum stayed years in Tier 3 and 2 before finally being considered for Tier 1 and getting MVPs. To push them up tiers, they'd have to earn their respect and consideration from championships, finals appearances, other accolades like All-Star MVP, and outplaying other All-Stars, records, stats, finals MVPs, etc. With all this, it's unlikely a player like DeRozan could suddenly jump to an MVP, even if he outplays everyone as an MVP frontrunner, because he's primarily played years in Tier 4 and not really near Tier 1. 14. Surpassing oneself. MVPs are usually career years for players. This is especially the case for trying to win multiple MVPs, where you have to do better than your previous MVP season statistically, like with Curry's second MVP season, breaking his own 3-point record from his previous MVP season the year before. To win multiple MVPs, especially in a row, you need to top and surpass your previous MVP season, especially recently. A good way to know these players also end up considered for most improved player, despite being MVP already and going for another MVP. It also favors consecutive MVP winners, even if it is technically more difficult to accomplish, as you'd have to do even better than your first MVP. Bill Russell, Will Chamberlain, Kareem, Moses Malone, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Duncan, Nash, LeBron, Curry, Giannis, Jokic. While NBA MVP has been awarded 67 times, the number of players to have won it is just over half of that figure at 35. That's because there are 15 players who account for 47 MVP awards. 15. Narratives to win in spite of another player or situation. Westbrook winning MVP right after KD left to the Warriors. Embiid's case for MVP in spite of the Ben Simmons refusing to play situation. KD trying to win without Kyrie due to COVID or after Harden left Brooklyn. 16. Injury consideration. Jokic carried the Nuggets without Murray and Michael Porter Jr. The same narrative rarely can be used to convince voters twice in a row though. Curry's MVP candidacy in 2021 for playing without Klay and Draymond, who missed most of the season. Let's talk about the negative criteria that can deter your MVP case now. 1. Multiple MVP candidates on the same team hurt your case, such as with the KD Warriors. KD and Curry both were losing on MVPs as their cases hurt each other's, even if they are the best seeds in the NBA and keep winning titles. 2. Reputational damage. The allegations against Kobe hurt his public image, and even if he was one of the NBA's best players at the time, the league preferred other players to win MVP over him, as rewarding him MVP would hurt the NBA's image. Remember, the MVP is a massive representation of the league's best player, and arguably the face of the league at the time, so having a player with the bad public image as the face of the league hurts the NBA's image, even if the player is the best in the world. Ja Morant recently also is dealing with this negative public perception of him due to the gun and club incident and is no longer being talked about as an MVP candidate. 3. The legacy debate and the GOAT conversation. This is much farther down the line and starts becoming a topic of debate and thinking when a player wins multiple MVPs, specifically over two like Nash, where the case is now heading towards GOAT debates and if the player deserves it. Even though the MVP is a regular season award, it starts to become a topic of whether the player has championships, finals MVPs, or at least made the finals as the best player in the league. A player would have to have legendary playoffs and season performances to cement not only their third MVP or third straight like Jokic is trying to. LeBron made the 2007 NBA Finals. LeBron was a rising star and it went on to win his first 2 MVPs in 2009, 2010. Jordan made and won his first NBA Finals in 1991. Jordan won his first MVPs in 1988 and 1991. Jokic has 2 MVPs and about to lose his third one because he's never made the NBA Finals, and the fear is if he really deserves to be in the GOAT conversation. 4. Analysts preferred whole numbers like a triple-double over Harden's 30-point streak.
But Jalen, you got to do it with the efficiency that Harden does it.
Harden ain't efficient.
He is efficient.
No, he isn't.
He
you
is
know what he's
efficient.
shooting from the floor?
His effective field goal percentage is quite high.
Wait, this is the way you do it.
You're saying effective field goal percentage.
Right.
I'm talking about his actual
field
goal percentage.
Hold up, Jalen. Actual
I know
field
you're
goal
going.
percentage.
I know where you're going. I know you're going. You're measuring the threes. I know what you're doing.
They're not all created equal.
Correct. Name me somebody that can average a triple-double for 3 straight years that's not named Big O.
LeBron James.
He hasn't done it once in his career.
Because it's.
What are you saying?
Getting the triple-double is not the highest correlation with winning.
It is this year. It is with these 2 streaks.
LeBron James is more correlated with winning than his style of play than any other player. A triple-double is nice. It's an amazing feat. It is only done by excellent players, but it's not the most important thing.
Some of these criteria is weighted more than others. Narrative and circumstances unfortunately does weigh more than being higher seed. This year, the narrative of sharing MVPs and how Jokic and Giannis already won to voter fatigue and feeling the need to give Embiid one now is a large narrative, especially around the race controversy from Perkins. This narrative has propelled Embiid to lead the MVP race. The narrative is now that he ducked facing Jokic in Denver, as even Perkins admitted, but ultimately all these criteria is considered and some voters weigh certain criteria over others, but the more criteria a player covers, the more likely they are to win MVP for the respective season.
Nash won 2 in a row. I don't think Nash deserved 2 in a row, personally. I don't think he did. He won 2 in a row, but I don't think he was the best player in the game 2 years in a row. In the regular season.
It wasn't about the best player. It was the best who had the best regular season.
One last thing to note is that while the MVP is usually the best player, as Charles Barkley himself said, it's an award of who had the best regular season, not necessarily the best player.